Ethan Cole wasn't this kind of man who drew attention anymore. At 42, he moved through Dry Hollow like a piece of furniture people had grown accustomed to, present, functional, unremarkable. His shoulders still carried the breadth of a man who'd once believed in his own strength, but now they slumped forward just enough to suggest defeat had settled in and made itself comfortable. Every Thursday, he rode into town. Same horse, same trail, same dust-choked road that kicked up red dirt and coated everything in a fine layer of frontier grit. And every Thursday, he stood by the train platform, alone. The first year, people asked questions, concerned questions, the kind neighbors ask when they still believe their curiosity might help. You expecting someone, Ethan? Waiting on a delivery? Got family coming through? His answers were always the same. Polite, vague, conversation ending. Just checking. Might be. Could happen. By the second year, the question shifted. Less concern, more gossip. The kind of talk that happens when people stop seeing tragedy and start seeing entertainment. He's lost it. Poor bastard. Think he even knows what he's waiting for anymore? By the fifth year, they stopped asking altogether. His Thursday vigil had become part of the town's fabric, like the crooked sign outside the saloon or the way the church bell stuck at 1/4 every hour. Strange, yes, but familiar strange, the kind you stop noticing. Now in year 10, Ethan Cole was a joke. Not a cruel one exactly, just the comfortable kind of mockery small towns reserve for their harmless eccentrics. There goes old Ethan. Thursday already? That man's got more faith than the preacher. If they'd asked him why he kept coming, really asked, not just tossed words in his direction while waiting for their own turn to talk, he wouldn't have been able to explain it himself. It wasn't hope. Hope had died sometime around year 3, buried under the weight of unanswered questions and the slow realization that some people vanish completely, leaving nothing behind but the holes they tear in your life. It wasn't obligation either. Nobody was making him do this. No promise to keep, no vow to honor. It was something worse. It was habit. The dangerous kind of habit that replaces purpose when you've got nothing left to fill the empty spaces. So every Thursday, Ethan Cole showed up. He stood on that platform. He watched trains arrive and depart. And when the last passenger stepped down and it became clear, again, that the person he was waiting for wasn't coming, he climbed back on his horse and rode home to a ranch that was falling apart one fence post at a time. This particular Thursday started like all the others. Ethan woke before dawn, fed the horses, checked the water troughs, and pretended not to notice how many things needed fixing that he didn't have the money or energy to address. The eastern fence line sagged. The barn door hung crooked. The roof over the main house had developed a leak he'd been meaning to patch for 3 months. His ranch, 60 acres of stubborn land that fought him for every goddamn thing, sat at the edge of the valley where Dry Hollow's optimistic founders had once imagined prosperity. That prosperity never came. The land was too hard, the water too scarce, the winters too brutal, and the summers too scorching. Most of the original homesteaders had moved on or died trying. Ethan stayed. Not out of love for the place. He'd lost that years ago. He stayed because leaving would require deciding where to go, and he'd used up his capacity for decisions. By mid-morning, he'd saddled his horse, a sturdy mare named Rust, because her coat was the color of old iron and her temperament just as reliable. She didn't spook easy, didn't complain, and didn't expect conversation. Perfect company for a man who'd forgotten how to provide it. The ride into town took 40 minutes at a steady pace. Ethan knew every rock, every turn, every scraggly tree that somehow managed to survive in this unforgiving stretch of country. The landscape didn't change, it just got older and drier, wearing itself down the same way he was. Dry Hollow wasn't much of a town. 200 souls on a good day, half that when the heat drove the smart ones elsewhere. A single main street lined with buildings that leaned into each other like drunks propping each other up. The general store, the saloon, the post office that doubled as a telegraph station, a church with a steeple that had lost its cross in a windstorm 8 years back and never bothered replacing it. And at the far end of town, the train platform. A simple wooden structure, barely more than a raised deck with a roof that provided questionable shade. But it was the town's connection to the wider world, the thing that reminded people that Dry Hollow, isolated as it was, hadn't been completely forgotten. Trains came through twice a week, Tuesday mornings and Thursday afternoons. Ethan only cared about Thursdays. He tied Russ to the post outside the general store and nodded to Mrs. Chen, who ran the place with the efficiency of a military general and the warmth of a cactus. "Afternoon, Ethan." "Ma'am." "Thursday again." "Yes, ma'am." "You know, there's a perfectly good train comes through on Tuesdays, too." "I'm aware." She shook her head, same way she did every week, and went back to arranging canned goods on shelves that never seemed to stay organized. Ethan walked toward the platform, boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The afternoon sun hammered down with the kind of heat that made you feel like the sky had a personal grudge against you. A few people loitered nearby, not waiting for the train, just killing time because there wasn't much else to kill in Dry Hollow. Tom Briggs leaned against the saloon wall, whittling a piece of wood into something that would probably never become anything. He was a ranch hand who drifted between jobs, saving just enough money to drink it all away before starting over. "Ethan." "Tom." "Expecting someone special today?" There was no meanness in the question, just the lazy curiosity of a man with nothing better to do. "Nope." "Then why—" "Don't know, Tom." That shut him up. Not because Ethan had been rude, but because the honesty in those 3 words carried more weight than any clever deflection could have. Further down, Sarah Hutchins sat on a bench with her daughter Emma. Sarah was a widow, had been for 6 years since her husband died in a mining accident up north. She'd raised Emma alone, working as a seamstress and taking in laundry to make ends meet. She offered Ethan a small, understanding smile. He tipped his hat in return. Sarah was one of the few people in town who never asked questions. She understood that some griefs didn't have explanations and some rituals didn't need justification. The distant whistle of the train cut through the afternoon heat. Right on time. Ethan's chest tightened the way it always did in this moment. That stupid, irrational part of him that refused to die completely would wake up and whisper, "What if? What if this is the day? What if she's on this train? What if the universe finally decides you've suffered enough?" He hated that voice, hated how it persisted despite a decade of disappointment, hated how it made him vulnerable in a way he couldn't afford to be. The train appeared on the horizon, a black snake of smoke and steel cutting across the barren landscape. It grew larger, louder, until the ground itself seemed to vibrate with its approach. It pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam, and for a moment everything was noise and motion. Then the doors opened. Passengers began to disembark. A traveling salesman with a heavy case and sweat-stained shirt. A young couple, newlyweds maybe, holding hands and looking around with the kind of optimism that wouldn't survive their first Dry Hollow summer. An older man, weathered and silent, who moved like someone returning home without any joy in the prospect. 3 more passengers, then 2, then 1, and then nothing. The platform cleared. The conductor called something to the engineer. The train prepared to continue its journey. Ethan stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling that familiar hollow ache settle back into his bones. 10 years, 520 Thursdays, and still, nothing. He turned to leave, same as always, when a voice stopped him cold. "Mr. Cole?" He turned back. Standing on the platform, having just stepped out from the last passenger car, was the postmaster's son, a skinny kid named Davy, who helped sort mail and run deliveries. "Got something for you," Davy said, holding out an envelope. "Came in this morning. Ma said it looked important." Ethan took the letter, noting the unfamiliar handwriting. Neat, precise, the kind of penmanship that suggested education and care. No return address. He turned it over in his hand, suddenly aware that several people were watching him. "You gonna open it?" Tom Briggs called out. "Eventually. Could be important." Could be. But he didn't open it there. Not in front of an audience. Not where his reaction, whatever it might be, would become fodder for gossip and speculation. He stuffed the letter into his jacket pocket, nodded his thanks to Davy, and walked back to where Rust waited patiently. The ride home felt longer than usual. The envelope in his pocket seemed to radiate heat, or maybe that was just his imagination working overtime. He'd gotten mail before, of course. Bills, mostly. The occasional notice from the county about taxes or land assessments. But something about this felt different. The handwriting was too careful, too personal. By the time he reached the ranch, the sun had started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Ethan had been the kind of man who still noticed such things. He unsaddled Rust, brushed her down, made sure she had feed and water, did all the small tasks that filled his evenings and kept him from thinking too much about how quiet the house would be when he finally went inside. But eventually, there was nothing left to do but face it. He climbed the 3 steps to his porch, boards creaking under his weight, and settled into the chair that had become his nightly perch. From here, he could see most of his property, the failing fence line, the struggling crops, the whole sorry picture of a life that had started with promise and curdled into mere survival. He pulled out the envelope, studied it one more time in the fading light, then opened it. The letter inside was written on good paper. Not fancy, but quality. The kind that cost extra. Dear Mr. Cole, I am writing in response to your inquiry posted with the Western Marriage Bureau. My name is Clara Hale, and after reading your notice, I believe we may be suited for correspondence. Ethan's hand trembled. 6 months ago, during a particularly brutal stretch of isolation and loneliness, he'd done something he never thought he would. Something he'd been too ashamed to tell anyone about. He'd written to a mail-order bride service. It had happened on a Tuesday night after too much whiskey and too many hours alone. The silence in his house had become unbearable. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the oppressive sort that made him forget what his own voice sounded like. He'd written the letter in a blur, saying things he barely remembered, posted it before he could change his mind, and then promptly tried to forget he'd done it at all. Apparently, he hadn't forgotten hard enough. He kept reading. I should be forthright about my circumstances. I am 34 years old, unmarried, and have been supporting myself for some time through various means. I'm not seeking rescue, Mr. Cole. I am seeking partnership. Your notice mentioned honesty as a requirement. So let me be honest. I am not a woman who fits easily into expected roles. I speak my mind. I ask difficult questions. I expect straight answers in return. If this sounds like more trouble than you're interested in, I understand. Burn this letter and forget you received it. But if you're willing to risk correspondence with someone who won't pretend to be softer than she is, write back. The choice is yours. Clara Hale. Ethan read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. There was something about the tone, sharp, direct, unapologetic, that cut through the fog he'd been living in. This wasn't a desperate woman looking for security. This was someone testing him. He sat there as darkness fell completely, the letter still in his hands, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity, not hope. He wasn't fool enough to mistake the two, but curiosity was something. It was more than the numb routine that had become his existence. The question was whether he had the courage to respond. It took Ethan 3 days to write back, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he couldn't figure out how to say it without sounding like exactly what he was. A lonely man who'd given up on most things, but couldn't quite give up on this. He went through 7 drafts. The first was too formal, the second too casual. The third read like a business transaction, the fourth like a confession, and the 5th like he was apologizing for existing. He burned them all. On the 6th attempt, he stopped trying to sound like something he wasn't and just wrote. Miss Hale, I'll be honest, since you asked for it, I don't know what I'm doing here. I wrote to that service on a bad night and figured nothing would come of it. Figured I'd made a mistake that would quietly disappear. But your letter didn't disappear. It showed up, and now I'm sitting here trying to decide if I'm brave enough to write back or smart enough to let it go. You said you're not looking for rescue. That's good, because I'm not in a position to provide it. My ranch barely survives season to season. I'm in debt to 3 different people and 1 bank. I'm 42 years old, and most days I feel twice that. But you also said you want straight answers, so here's one. Yes. I'm willing to risk correspondence, not because I think this leads anywhere, not because I have expectations, but because your letter was the first interesting thing to happen to me in a decade, and I'm not ready to let interesting walk away without at least seeing what it wants. If you write back, don't soften yourself on my account. I've had enough of people being careful around me. Ethan Cole. He posted it before he could reconsider, then spent the next 2 weeks convinced he'd made a fool of himself. But on the 3rd Thursday after sending his response, Davy appeared on the platform again with another envelope. This time, Ethan opened it right there. Mr. Cole, your honesty is refreshing. Most men would have tried to make themselves sound more appealing. You made yourself sound exhausted and broke. I appreciate that. Since we're being direct, let me ask you something. What are you afraid of? Not the practical fears, debt, drought, failing crops. I mean, the real ones. The fears that wake you up at night. The ones you don't say out loud. Answer that, and I'll tell you mine. Clara Ethan stared at the letter for a long time. Nobody had asked him that question before. Not in any way that mattered. People asked if he was okay, if he needed help, if there was anything they could do. But nobody asked what actually scared him. He wrote back that same evening. Clara, I'm afraid of being forgotten. Not in the dramatic way, not worried about leaving a legacy or being remembered by history. I'm afraid that I've lived this life, done these things, felt these feelings, and when I'm gone, it'll be like I never existed at all. Like I was just empty space that briefly pretended to be a person. I'm afraid that 10 years from now, someone will ride past this ranch and won't even remember my name. That's what keeps me up. Your turn. Ethan. Her response came faster this time. Within days instead of weeks. Ethan, I'm afraid I'm unlovable. Not in theory, in practice. I'm afraid that the parts of me that make me interesting are the same parts that make me impossible to keep. I'm afraid I ask too much, demand too much, am too much. And I'm afraid that one day I'll meet someone who sees all of that and says, yes, that's exactly what I want. And I won't believe them. So we're both afraid of disappearing, just in different ways. Tell me something else. Not about fear. About want. What do you actually want, Ethan? Not what you think you should want. Not what's practical. What do you want? Clara. This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. Clara, I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting. I've spent 10 years on that train platform every Thursday, waiting for something that never comes. And even when I'm not there, I'm still waiting. For the drought to end, for money to appear, for things to get easier. I want to live like I'm moving towards something instead of away from everything. I want to matter to someone, not in a useful way. I know I'm useful. My horses need me. My land needs me. I want to matter to someone who doesn't need me but chooses me anyway. That probably sounds selfish. What about you? What do you want? Ethan. Ethan. It doesn't sound selfish. It sounds human. I want to stop running. I've been moving for so long I forgot what it feels like to stay. Every time I settle somewhere, I convince myself it's temporary. I keep my belongings in a trunk that can be packed in an hour. I don't make plans past next month. I want to live somewhere and call it home without flinching at the word. And I want to be known, really known, by someone who sees all the difficult parts and doesn't try to fix them or ignore them or pretend they're charming quirks. Someone who just says, yes, I see you, and I'm staying. Clara. The letters continued. Week after week, they peeled back layers. Neither of them knew they still had. Clara told him about growing up in a city she wouldn't name, about leaving under circumstances she wasn't ready to detail, about working jobs no respectable woman was supposed to acknowledge, saloons, mining camps, places where survival mattered more than reputation. She told him she'd learned to read land, to spot gold in creek beds, to negotiate with men who thought her presence was an invitation. She told him she was tired. Ethan told her about the ranch, about the years of barely making it, about the weight of inheriting something you can't quite maintain and can't quite abandon. He told her about neighbors who'd given up and moved on, about the ones who stayed and slowly withered. He told her about loneliness that had become so familiar it felt like a personality trait. But he didn't tell her about Lydia. He couldn't. Not yet. That wound was still too raw, too complicated, too tangled up in shame and grief and unanswered questions. And then, 3 months into their correspondence, Clara wrote something that stopped him cold. Ethan, I think it's time we meet. I've told you most of what I am. You've told me most of what you are. We can keep writing letters forever, building a perfect version of something that might not survive reality. Or we can risk it. I will arrive on a Thursday train. If you regret it, if you take one look at me and realize you've made a mistake, just say these words. The weather has turned. I'll understand. I'll get back on the next train. No arguments, no scenes. But if I step off that platform and you don't say those words, then we're doing this. For real. Let me know which Thursday. Claire Ethan read the letter sitting on his porch as the sun set behind the hills. His hands shook. This was it. The moment where everything became real or fell apart completely. He could write back and say no. Could claim he wasn't ready, needed more time, had reconsidered. She'd understand. She'd said as much in every letter. She wasn't here to force anything. Or he could set a date. He looked out at his failing ranch, his empty house, his life that had become nothing but routine and decay. And he realized something that might have been obvious to anyone else but felt like revelation to him. He had nothing left to lose. Nothing except the possibility of something better. He went inside, lit a lamp, and wrote his response. Clara, 3 weeks from now, Thursday afternoon train. I won't say the words. Come home. Ethan. He posted the letter the next morning and spent the following 21 days in a state somewhere between terror and anticipation. The 3 weeks between sending his letter and Clara's arrival were the longest of Ethan's life, which was saying something, considering he'd already lived through 10 years of empty Thursdays. But this was different. This waiting had a destination, an endpoint, a moment when something would finally happen instead of continuing not to happen. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. The first week, Ethan threw himself into work with an intensity that surprised even him. He fixed the eastern fence line, something he'd been putting off for months, patched the barn roof, cleared brush from the property line, repaired the water trough that had been leaking since last spring. His body ached in ways it hadn't in years, but the exhaustion felt good, purposeful. He needed to be too tired to think, because when he stopped moving, the thoughts came flooding in. What if she takes one look at you and realizes this was a mistake? What if she's nothing like her letters? What if you're nothing like your letters? What if you've built something in writing that can't survive the weight of real life? Tom Briggs noticed the sudden burst of industry and commented on it one afternoon when he rode out to return a tool he'd borrowed months ago. You building something? Tom asked, surveying the repaired fence with obvious surprise. Just maintenance. Hell of a lot of maintenance all at once. Ethan hammered another post into place, not looking up. It needed doing. For 10 years it needed doing. Now suddenly it needs doing this week? You got a point, Tom? Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, People are talking. People are always talking. They're saying you got a woman coming. Ethan's hammer paused mid-swing. He didn't confirm or deny it, just drove the next nail with more force than necessary. Tom continued, unfazed. Sarah Hutchins mentioned she saw you post a letter a couple weeks back, then saw Davy deliver one to you on Thursday, then another letter posted. People added it up. People should mind their own business. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Tom said with a dry laugh. But this is dry hollow. Other people's business is the only entertainment we got. He paused, then added more seriously. Just be careful, Ethan. I mean that. Careful of what? Of hoping too hard. Hope's expensive out here. Most of us can't afford it. After Tom left, Ethan stood there with the hammer in his hand, staring at nothing. Hope. That goddamn word again. The second week was worse. The physical work ran out. The ranch was as repaired as it was going to get without serious money he didn't have. Which meant he was left with time and his own thoughts. A combination that had never worked well for him. He found himself standing on his porch at odd hours, staring toward the road that led to town, as if Clara might appear early, as if she might decide not to wait for the scheduled Thursday and just show up. She didn't, of course. The road stayed empty. On Tuesday of that second week, Sarah Hutchins rode out to his ranch with her daughter Emma. She brought a basket of bread and preserves, her excuse for checking on him. Heard you've been busy, she said, noting the visible improvements. Needed doing. Seems like good timing. Ethan didn't take the bait, just invited them in and put coffee on. Emma, 9 years old and still young enough to ask questions adults wouldn't, looked around his kitchen and said, Are you getting married, Mr. Cole? Emma! Sarah's face flushed. That's not polite. Mrs. Yates said Mr. Cole wrote to a marriage service and now a lady's coming on the train and, Emma, enough. But Ethan surprised himself by answering, I don't know yet. Emma's eyes went wide. You don't know if you're getting married? I don't know what's happening. Someone's coming to visit. After that, we'll see. Sarah studied him carefully. You sound terrified. I am. That's probably healthy. Is it? Better than being cocky about it. She poured herself coffee, settled into a chair. You know people are going to be watching when that train pulls in. I figured. Half the town's going to invent excuses to be there. Can't stop them. You could ask for privacy. Tell folks to stay away. Ethan shook his head. Won't matter. They'll just hide and watch from a distance. At least if they're upfront about it. I know where they are. Sarah smiled slightly. Practical. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before she said, Can I give you some advice? Can I stop you? No. She set down her cup. When my husband died, people kept telling me it would get better, that time would heal things, that I'd move on eventually. Did you? Not the way they meant. I didn't heal and forget. I healed and remembered. The pain got quieter, but it never left. It just became part of me. She looked at him directly. Whatever happened to you 10 years ago, whatever put you on that platform every Thursday, it's still with you, and it's going to be with you when this woman arrives. I know. Does she know? Ethan's jaw tightened. Not everything. Maybe she should. Maybe some things are too complicated to explain in letters. Sarah stood, calling for Emma to finish her bread. At the door, she turned back. Just remember, you can't build something new on top of something unfinished. Sooner or later, the old foundation cracks. After they left, Ethan sat alone with those words echoing in his head. You can't build something new on top of something unfinished. He thought about Lydia, about that one impossible evening 10 years ago that had somehow defined every day since. He'd never told Clara about her, had written around her, referenced a difficult past without details, implied loss without explaining what was lost. Not because he was lying, but because he didn't know how to explain loving someone you met once, who disappeared without explanation, and who you never stopped looking for even after you stopped believing you'd find them. How do you put that in a letter? How do you tell someone you're trying to move forward with that you've spent a decade standing still? The third week arrived with unseasonable heat that made everything worse. The town was buzzing now. Everyone knew. Mrs. Chen at the general store, the regulars at the saloon, even the circuit preacher who came through once a month had heard something and offered to be available if Ethan needed counsel. He didn't. On Wednesday, the day before Clara's arrival, Ethan rode into town for supplies he didn't really need, just an excuse to show his face, to prove he wasn't hiding. The moment he tied up Rust, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway of the general store. Tomorrow's the day, she said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. You ready? No. She nodded approvingly. Good. Man who thinks he's ready for something like this is a fool. Inside the store, she moved around with her usual efficiency, pulling items off shelves before Ethan even asked for them. You'll want coffee. Good coffee, not the swill you usually buy. I don't. And decent soap. And new sheets wouldn't hurt. When's the last time you replaced those? Mrs. Chen, don't Mrs. Chen me. You're about to have company for the first time in 10 years. You're going to make an effort. She piled items on his counter with the authority of someone who wouldn't be argued with. I can't afford. You'll pay me back when you can. Consider it an investment in this town not being completely pathetic. Ethan almost smiled. Generous way to put it. I'm a businesswoman, Mr. Cole, not a romantic. But even I can see that if this works out, it's good for everyone. New blood, new energy. Maybe someone who can talk sense into you about expanding that property instead of just surviving on it. He paid for what he could, let her put the rest on credit, and was loading his horse when Tom Briggs appeared from the saloon. Big day tomorrow, Tom said. Seems like. You want company when you go to meet her? Ethan looked at him, surprised. Tom wasn't the sentimental type, wasn't the supportive friend type either, really. He was the drink and complain type, the drift through life type. Why would you offer that? Tom shrugged, uncomfortable. I don't know. Seems like the kind of thing that'd be easier with someone standing next to you, even if it's just me. Something in Ethan's chest loosened slightly. I appreciate it, Tom, but this is something I need to do alone. You sure? Yeah, Tom nodded, accepting it. Well, if it goes sideways, first drink's on me. And if it goes well? First drink's still on me. Just for different reasons. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around him. This house that had been empty for so long, that had stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a storage space for his life. Tomorrow, that might change. Or tomorrow, he might watch someone step off a train, say 5 words, and disappear back into the unknown. Both possibilities terrified him equally. At some point near dawn, he must have dozed off because he woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains and the immediate, crushing realization. Today was Thursday. Ethan moved through the morning in a fog, going through motions his body knew by muscle memory while his mind stayed somewhere else entirely. He fed the horses but couldn't remember doing it. Made coffee but left it sitting on the stove until it went cold. Started to shave, then stopped halfway through and stared at his reflection like he didn't recognize the man looking back. The face in the mirror was weathered, lined in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the kind of life he'd lived. There were scars there. A thin one across his left eyebrow from a fence post that had snapped back when he was 23, another along his jawline from a fight he barely remembered. His eyes looked tired. Hell, everything about him looked tired. He finished shaving with hands that weren't quite steady, nicked himself twice, and cursed under his breath both times. By the time he'd cleaned up and changed into clothes that weren't work-worn and dust-covered, it was nearly noon. The train wouldn't arrive until 2:30. 2.5 hours that felt like an eternity, and also not nearly enough time. He stood in his bedroom, looking at the clean shirt he'd put on, and had the sudden irrational urge to change again. This shirt was too formal, or not formal enough, or it made him look like he was trying too hard, or not trying hard enough. Jesus Christ, he muttered to himself. Get it together. But his hands were shaking when he buttoned his vest. The ride into town took forever and also no time at all. Ethan was aware of every detail with a strange, heightened clarity, the way Rust's gait changed when they crossed from hard-packed dirt to the slightly softer ground near the creek bed. The exact pattern of clouds stretched across the sky. The distant sound of someone hammering something in the direction of town. His mind wouldn't settle. It kept jumping between scenarios, each one worse than the last. She steps off the train and he knows immediately it won't work. Something in her face, or his, or the air between them makes it clear this was a mistake. She steps off the train and she's beautiful and interesting and everything her letters promised. But she takes one look at him and realizes he's not enough. She doesn't step off the train at all. Changed her mind somewhere along the route and kept going. She steps off and he opens his mouth to greet her, and nothing comes out because he's forgotten how to talk to people like a normal human being. Each scenario played out in vivid detail, and each one ended with him standing alone on that platform, watching another train pull away, returning to his empty ranch and his empty life, with the added weight of knowing he'd tried and failed. When he reached the edge of town, he almost turned back. His hands tightened on the reins. Rust slowed, sensing his hesitation. He could do it. Just turn around, ride home. Let the train come and go without him. Clara would understand. She'd said as much. If he had second thoughts, she wouldn't blame him. But even as he considered it, he knew he couldn't, because this moment, terrifying as it was the only thing he'd moved toward in 10 years. Everything else had been standing still or sliding backward. This, at least, was motion, direction. Even if it led nowhere, at least he'd know he tried. He nudged Rust forward. The town was more crowded than usual for a Thursday afternoon. People lingered near the platform with transparent excuses. Mrs. Chen was reorganizing her storefront display, which coincidentally gave her a perfect view of the train station. Tom Briggs sat on the saloon steps, pretending to read a newspaper he was holding upside down. Sarah Hutchins was there with Emma, claiming they needed to mail a letter, though the post office was in the opposite direction. Even the town's part-time sheriff, a man named Davis who usually spent his afternoons napping, had found reason to be present, leaning against a post and whittling. Ethan tied up Rust and walked toward the platform, feeling every eye on him. Nobody said anything directly, but the murmur of conversation dropped to near silence as he passed. It was like walking through water. Each step took effort. He reached the platform and stood in his usual spot, hands in his pockets, trying to look like this was just another Thursday. It wasn't fooling anyone. Tom Briggs finally broke the silence. Hell of a day for it, Ethan. Yep. Not too hot, not too cold. Nope. Good train weather. Tom. Yeah? Shut up. Tom grinned and went back to his upside-down newspaper. Sarah approached more carefully, Emma trailing behind her. You doing all right? She asked quietly. Ask me in an hour. Fair enough. She hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I think you're brave. Brave or stupid? Sometimes there's not much difference. Emma piped up. Is she pretty? Emma, Sarah warned. What? I'm just asking if… I don't know, Ethan interrupted, and it was true. Clara had never mentioned what she looked like, and he'd never asked. Their letters had been about other things, deeper things, the kind of things that mattered more than appearances, though he'd be lying if he said he wasn't curious. I bet she's pretty, Emma decided. In stories, the mail-order brides are always pretty. This isn't a story, Ethan said, more sharply than he intended. Emma's face fell. Sarah put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Come on, let's give Mr. Cole some space. As they walked away, Ethan felt a stab of guilt. Emma was just a kid, excited, innocent. She didn't deserve his anxiety spilling over onto her, but he couldn't bring himself to call them back and apologize. He needed all his focus just to keep standing here, waiting, not running. The minutes crawled by. 2 o'clock came and went, 2:15, 2:20. The distant whistle of the approaching train cut through the thick afternoon air, and Ethan's entire body went rigid. This was it. The point of no return. He could still leave, could walk away right now, get on his horse, and ride out before the train arrived. But his feet stayed planted. The train appeared on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second. The sound of it built, the rhythmic chug of the engine, the screech of metal on metal, the hiss of steam. Ethan's heart hammered so hard he thought people might be able to hear it. The train pulled into the station with its usual dramatic announcement of arrival, brakes squealing, steam billowing, the whole mechanical beast shuddering to a stop. For a moment, nothing happened. The doors stayed closed. Ethan's mouth went dry. Then the conductor appeared, calling out, "Dry Hollow! 15-minute stop!" The doors opened. Passengers began to emerge. An older woman with 2 large carpet bags. A salesman with his sample case. A young man who looked lost. 2 more passengers, then 3. Then… nothing. The platform cleared. Ethan's chest tightened. She wasn't here. She'd changed her mind, or something had happened, or… A figure appeared in the doorway of the last passenger car. Slow, deliberate. A woman in a gray traveling cloak, hood pulled up despite the heat. She stood there for a moment, silhouetted against the darker interior of the train car, and Ethan couldn't breathe. She descended the steps carefully, one at a time, boots clicking against metal and then wood. When she reached the platform, she stopped. Didn't move toward him. Didn't pull back her hood. Just stood there, 10 feet away, waiting. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. Ethan knew what he was supposed to do. Walk over, introduce himself, welcome her. But his legs wouldn't move. Because something about her stance, the way she held herself, the line of her shoulders visible even beneath the cloak. It was familiar. Impossibly familiar. The woman spoke, her voice clear but cautious. "Mr. Cole?" That voice. Ethan's world tilted. He knew that voice. Not from letters. From memory. From a decade ago. From one impossible evening that had defined every day since. "Does the weather still hold?" she asked. The agreed-upon question. The signal. If he said the words, "The weather has turned," she would leave. But Ethan couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but stare as the woman reached up and slowly pulled back her hood. Dark hair threaded with gray now. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. A scar on her left cheek, thin and pale. Older. Harder. Changed by years of living. But unmistakably, impossibly, the same woman he'd spent 10 years looking for. Lydia. The name crashed through his mind like thunder. Not Clara, not some stranger from letters. Lydia. Lydia Vance, who had walked into his life for one evening 10 years ago and then vanished without explanation. Who he'd searched for until searching became impossible. Who he'd mourned while she was still alive somewhere, living some life he couldn't reach. Lydia, standing in front of him now, watching him with eyes that held both hope and fear in equal measure. His knees almost gave out. "Ethan," she said, and her voice cracked on his name. Somewhere in the background, someone gasped. Maybe Mrs. Chen, maybe Sarah, maybe half the town. But Ethan couldn't look away from Lydia's face. 10 years. 10 years of standing on this platform. 10 years of empty Thursdays. 10 years of believing she was gone, that he'd never understand why, that whatever they'd had, brief and fragile as it was, had been one-sided or imaginary or just not enough to make her stay. And here she was. You, he managed. His voice sounded destroyed. I know. Her hands twisted in the fabric of her cloak. I know this isn't what you expected. I know I should have. You're Clara. Clara Hale was my mother's name. I used it because I didn't know if. She stopped, swallowed hard. I didn't know if you'd respond if I used my real name. Didn't know if you'd remember, or if you did remember, if you'd want anything to do with me after what I did. Ethan took a step toward her, then stopped. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. 10 years, he said. I know. 10 fucking years, Lydia. I know. I looked for you. I looked everywhere. I thought. His voice broke. I thought you were dead. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. Sorry? The word came out harsh, louder than he intended. You disappeared. No explanation, no word, nothing. And now you show up wearing a different name and saying sorry like that fixes anything? The crowd around them had gone completely silent. Even Emma had stopped fidgeting. Lydia's composure cracked. I couldn't. She took a shaky breath. I had reasons. They weren't good enough, I know that now, but at the time. What reasons? Ethan demanded. What reasons could possibly. I was married. The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step. What? When I met you, Lydia said, tears streaming down her face now. I was running from a husband who. She stopped, looked away. Who thought he owned me? Who made it clear I could leave him by dying or not at all? The anger drained out of Ethan, replaced by something colder. You were running. Yes. That night we met was one of the worst nights of my life. I'd gotten away finally, had made it 3 states over, thought I was safe, and then I met you, and for a few hours I felt like. Her voice broke. Like I could be a person again instead of just prey. Ethan's mind reeled. But you left. Because he found me. Lydia's hands were shaking now, too. The next morning, I saw him in town, asking about me. And I knew if I stayed, if he connected me to you, he'd hurt you to punish me. So I ran. Again. Kept running for years. And now? He's dead. She said it flatly, without emotion. 3 years dead. Fell drunk down a mine shaft. So you've been free for 3 years. Yes. And you're just now. Ethan couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the hurt and confusion and anger all tangled together. I tried to find you, Lydia said desperately. After he died, I went back to the town where we met. You were gone, ranch sold, no forwarding information. I asked everyone I could find. Nobody knew where you'd gone. I came here. To Dry Hollow. I know that now. But it took me 2 years of searching to figure it out, and by then, she wiped at her face. By then, so much time had passed that I thought maybe you'd moved on. Maybe you'd forgotten. Maybe showing up would just open old wounds that had finally healed. So you wrote to me as someone else. I had to know if you'd even respond, if there was any chance that we. She looked at him with such raw vulnerability that something in his chest cracked. I fell in love with you that night, Ethan. One evening. That's all it took, and I've been carrying it for 10 years, not knowing if you felt anything at all, or if I was just some woman passing through. The platform was so quiet Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. Everyone was watching, waiting. He looked at Lydia, really looked at her, at the woman she'd become, at the scars and lines that spoke of survival, at the fear and hope fighting for dominance in her expression. 10 years ago, she'd been young and bright and full of possibility. Now she was something else, harder, tempered by life. But standing there, looking at her, he realized something that cut through all the confusion and hurt. She was still her, and he was still him, and somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other again. The weather, Lydia said quietly. Does it still hold? It was the signal, the out, the escape clause they'd built into this arrangement. If he said the weather has turned, she would leave, would get back on the train, would disappear again, this time for good. He could do it, could let her go, could protect himself from whatever pain might come from trying to rebuild something that had been broken before it even started. But as he stood there, looking at her face, he realized he'd already made his choice. He'd made it 10 years ago when he'd started standing on this platform every Thursday. He'd made it when he'd written to that marriage service on a lonely night. He'd made it when he'd read her letters and felt something in him wake up after years of sleep. "Ethan?" Her voice was small, terrified. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and collapsed against him. He held her tight, feeling her shake with silent tears, and said the only words that mattered. "The weather's fine. You're coming home." Behind them, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the whole damn town was applauding like they'd just witnessed a play. Ethan didn't care. He held Lydia and felt 10 years of grief and longing and confusion pour out of both of them in a way that was messy and raw and nothing like the neat resolutions in stories. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. Both of them were shaking. "I don't know how to do this," Ethan admitted. "Me neither. I'm angry at you." "You should be. And hurt." "I know. But I also—" He stopped, trying to find words that didn't sound stupid or insufficient. "I never stopped." "Neither did I." Tom Briggs appeared at Ethan's elbow, looking uncomfortable but determined. Ethan? You want me to get her trunk?" Ethan had forgotten about luggage entirely, about practical things, about anything beyond the fact that Lydia was here and real and not disappearing again. "Yeah," he managed. "Thanks, Tom." Tom headed for the baggage car, and Mrs. Chen materialized with a handkerchief that she pressed into Lydia's hand. "Welcome to Dry Hollow," Mrs. Chen said briskly. "I run the general store. You'll need supplies. Come by tomorrow and we'll get you sorted." "Thank you," Lydia said, her voice still thick with tears. Sarah Hutchins approached more carefully, Emma hiding behind her skirts now, suddenly shy. "I'm Sarah," she said simply. "If you need anything or just want company, I'm 2 streets over." Lydia nodded gratefully. The crowd was starting to disperse now that the dramatic moment had passed, though Ethan knew the gossip was just beginning. This story would be told and retold until it barely resembled what had actually happened. He didn't care about that either. Tom returned with a battered trunk and a smaller carpet bag. "This everything?" "That's it," Lydia confirmed. Everything she owned, Ethan realized, fitting in 2 pieces of luggage. Just like she'd said in her letters, always ready to move at a moment's notice. But not anymore. He loaded her belongings onto Rust, then looked at Lydia. "You know how to ride?" "Not well." "You can ride with me then. It's not far." She nodded and let him help her up, settling behind him with her arms around his waist. The contact felt strange and familiar at the same time, like coming home to a place that had changed while you were gone but was still recognizably home. They rode out of town in silence, Ethan acutely aware of every place where her body pressed against his back, of her breathing, of her presence. Real, solid. Here. After 10 minutes, she spoke quietly, her voice close to his ear. "I read your letters over and over, the ones you sent as yourself. You were so honest. Didn't seem worth lying. You told me things I don't think you'd told anyone. Probably not. But you never mentioned me." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I didn't know how. Were you angry when you figured out who I was?" "I didn't figure it out until you pulled back that hood." She was quiet for a moment. "Really? Really? I thought I was sure you'd recognize my voice, or something in the letters would give it away, or I wasn't looking for you in those letters, Lydia. I'd given up on that years ago. But you kept going to the platform. That was habit, not hope." She tightened her arms around him. "I'm sorry I made you wait so long. I'm sorry I couldn't find you. You tried. Not hard enough. Ethan, if he'd found you, if he'd known you mattered to me," her voice went cold, "he would have killed you. I made sure nobody could connect us. That was the only way to keep you safe." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was different now. Less tense, more settled. When they reached the ranch, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in amber light. Ethan dismounted and helped Lydia down. She stood in the yard, looking around at the property with an expression he couldn't quite read. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I've had in 10 years. He showed her inside, suddenly embarrassed by how empty the house was. How bare. He'd never bothered decorating, never saw the point when it was just him. Kitchen's through there. Bedroom upstairs. There's a guest room too if you need. Ethan. He stopped. She stood in the middle of his front room, still wearing her traveling cloak, looking exhausted and vulnerable and uncertain. I need you to know, she said. I don't expect anything. Not right away. Maybe not ever, if you decide this is too much. I know you agreed to Clara Hale, not to this, to me, to everything that comes with me. What comes with you? Complications, baggage, a past that's messy and painful. I'm not... She stopped, started again. I'm not the woman you met 10 years ago. That woman was young and naive and still believed things could be simple. I don't believe that anymore. Ethan set down her trunk and crossed to where she stood. Good. Good. I don't want simple. I don't want easy. I had easy. It was boring and lonely and meaningless. He looked at her directly. I want real. And real is complicated and messy and hard. You say that now. I've had 10 years to think about it. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. So have I. They stood there, close enough to touch, but not touching, and Ethan felt the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. There were conversations they needed to have, questions that needed answering, wounds that needed acknowledging. But not tonight. Tonight they just needed to breathe the same air and accept that this impossible thing was actually happening. You must be exhausted, Ethan said finally. I am. Guest room's made up. Not much, but it's clean. Thank you. He showed her upstairs, carrying her trunk, pointing out the washroom and where to find towels and apologizing for how basic everything was. At the door to the guest room, she turned to him. Ethan? Yeah? Thank you for not saying the words. The weather thing? She nodded. Yeah, well... He shrugged awkwardly. I've waited this long. Would be stupid to give up now. She smiled, really smiled, and something about it reminded him powerfully of that night 10 years ago when she'd laughed at something he'd said, and he'd realized he could listen to that sound for the rest of his life. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Lydia. He went back downstairs, his mind spinning, and stood in his empty kitchen staring at nothing. Lydia was upstairs, in his house, real and alive and here. After 10 years of absence, she'd returned not as a ghost or a memory, but as a woman with her own scars and stories and survival. He didn't know what happened next, didn't know if they could actually build something from the wreckage of what they'd lost. But for the first time in a decade, he wasn't standing still. He was moving forward, and that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Ethan didn't sleep that night either, but for entirely different reasons than the night before. He lay in his bed listening to the sounds of another person in his house. The creak of floorboards overhead, water running in the washroom, the small, almost imperceptible noises of someone existing in a space that had been silent for so long. Around 3 a.m, he heard her get up, footsteps moving slowly, carefully, trying not to wake him. He stayed still, listening as she descended the stairs and moved through the house. After a few minutes, curiosity won out over propriety. He pulled on his pants and a shirt and went downstairs. He found her standing in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, staring out the window at the dark landscape beyond. Couldn't sleep? He asked. She turned, startled. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. I was already awake. Insomnia? Something like that. He moved to the stove, checking the embers, adding wood. Coffee? At 3 a.m? I've had it at worse hours. She smiled faintly. Then, yes, thank you. They stood in awkward silence while the coffee heated, both of them acutely aware of how strange this was. Two people who'd shared one evening 10 years ago, who'd exchanged letters as strangers, now standing in a kitchen in the middle of the night, trying to figure out how to be in the same space. When the coffee was ready, Ethan poured 2 cups, and they sat at the kitchen table. The lamplight cast long shadows across the room, making everything feel suspended, unreal. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, Lydia said, finally. That this is just another dream, and I'll open my eyes and be somewhere else. I had the same thought earlier. How long did you dream about this, finding me again? Ethan stared into his coffee. Years, but the dream stopped eventually. Got tired of waking up disappointed. She flinched. I did that to you. We both did it to each other. You didn't exactly have an easy time either. No? She wrapped her hands around the cup, seeking warmth. But I knew I was alive. You didn't even have that. Tell me something, Ethan said. When did you realize it was me? That the notice you responded to was mine? When I saw your name on the letter, Ethan Cole. There aren't many of those, and the location matched where I'd finally tracked you to. I knew before I even read what you'd written. But you didn't tell me. Would you have believed me? If I'd written back saying I was Lydia, the woman who disappeared without a word 10 years ago, now conveniently looking for you through a marriage service? She shook her head. You would have thought it was a cruel joke, or a con. I wouldn't have blamed you. So you tested me instead. I tested us, wanted to see if what we felt that night was real or just circumstance and timing. And she looked at him directly. It was real. Reading your letters, I fell in love with you all over again. Maybe deeper this time, because I was getting the parts of you that don't show up in one evening of conversation. Ethan's throat tightened. I fell in love with Clara Hale, woman I'd never met. Are you angry about that? That I wasn't who you thought? I don't know what I am. He ran a hand through his hair. Part of me wants to be angry. Feels like I should be. You lied. I did. But another part of me doesn't care because you're here and that's all I wanted for 10 years. So what do we do with that? I have no idea. They sat in silence, sipping coffee that was too hot and too bitter but gave them something to do with their hands. Can I ask you something? Lydia said. Yeah. Why did you keep going to that platform every Thursday for 10 years? What made you keep showing up? Ethan considered the question, trying to find an answer that made sense. I told myself it was routine, just something I did, like feeding the horses or checking the fence line. But really, he set down his cup. I think I was punishing myself. For what? For not making you stay that night, for not seeing that something was wrong, for not protecting you. Ethan, you couldn't have... I know that now. Knew it then too, probably, but knowing something and believing it are different things. He looked at her. Every Thursday I stood on that platform was me saying I hadn't forgotten, that whatever we had, however brief, mattered enough to mark. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. I marked it too, different way. I kept moving, kept running, but every town I landed in, I'd find the highest point and look toward where you were, or where I thought you might be, and I'd remember. Remember what? How you looked at me that night, like I was worth seeing, not worth owning or controlling or using, just worth seeing. She wiped at her face. My husband never looked at me that way, not once in 7 years of marriage, but you did it in an evening. How old were you when you married him? 19, stupid and desperate to get away from a family that didn't want me. So you jumped from one trap to another. Exactly. She laughed bitterly. Thought I was being smart. Independent. Turned out I was just trading one prison for another. When did you realize? First month. He showed me who he really was and made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. Her voice went flat. He broke my arm the first time I tried. Said next time it'd be my neck. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. I'm glad he's dead. So am I. Though I wasted 3 years after his death being too scared to believe he was really gone. Kept thinking he'd show up, that it was a trick. Is that why you kept moving? Partly. Also didn't know how to stop. When you've been running that long, standing still feels dangerous. And now? She met his eyes. Now I'm tired of running. I want to try standing still. With you, if you'll let me. Ethan wanted to say yes immediately. Wanted to close the distance between them and promise her everything she'd been denied for 10 years. But he'd learned something about promises in his 42 years. They were easy to make in moments of emotion and hard to keep when reality set in. I want that too, he said carefully. But I don't know how to do it right. I've been alone a long time, got used to my own company, my own ways. I'm not easy to live with. Neither am I. I'm broke. This ranch barely survives. You'd be signing on for hard work and uncertain prospects. I've had worse. I'm still angry at you sometimes. It comes in waves. I'll be fine, and then I'll remember the 10 years and it hits me again. I know. I'm angry at me, too. And I don't know if I can. He stopped, trying to find the right words. I don't know if I can be what you need, what anyone needs. I'm damaged goods, Lydia. She reached across the table and took his hand. So am I. Maybe that's why this works. We're both too broken to expect perfection from each other. Her hand was warm in his, solid, real. Can we just try? She asked. No promises, no expectations. Just try and see what happens. Yeah, Ethan said. We can try. The sun was starting to lighten the sky by the time they finished talking. Not about anything profound or relationship defining. Just small things, practical things. How she liked her coffee, whether she could cook, what parts of the ranch needed immediate attention, what their plan was for tomorrow. It felt almost normal, almost like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. When full daylight arrived, they moved into the day with the careful choreography of two people learning each other's rhythms. Ethan went out to handle the morning chores. Lydia found the kitchen supplies and made breakfast from what little he had. The eggs were overcooked and the bacon was burned, but Ethan ate every bite without complaint. I'm not much of a cook, Lydia admitted. Neither am I. We'll figure it out. After breakfast, Ethan took her on a tour of the property, showed her the struggling crops, the fence lines that needed repair, the irrigation system that worked maybe half the time. He didn't try to make it look better than it was, didn't hide the extent of the problems. It's a lot, he said, as they stood looking at a particularly bad section of fence. More than one person can handle. More than two, probably, without more money than we've got. Lydia walked the fence line, running her hand along the posts, checking the ground. Her face was thoughtful, focused. She moved like someone who knew what she was looking at. You said you learned to read land, Ethan said. What does that mean exactly? Means I can look at earth and rock and water and tell you what's underneath, what it's worth, what it can support. She crouched down, scooped up a handful of dirt, let it run through her fingers. Learned at working mining camps. The men would stake claims based on rumors and hope. I learned to look deeper. And what do you see here? She stood, brushing off her hands, and pointed toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of his property. That creek, it shifts course? Every spring. Floods and finds new paths. It's a pain in the ass. It's also a gift. How do you figure? Water that moves like that carries things. Sediment, minerals, sometimes more valuable things. She walked toward the creek, Ethan following. You ever find anything in these creek beds after the water recedes? Rocks, mostly. Some interesting ones. I've got a collection in the barn. Show me. They went to the barn and Ethan pulled out a wooden crate filled with stones he'd collected over the years. Nothing special, just things that caught his eye when he was working near the creek. Lydia sorted through them methodically, setting aside most, examining a few more carefully. She held up a particularly heavy, unremarkable-looking rock. This one. Where'd you find it? Near the bend in the creek. Eastern section. Why? She didn't answer immediately, just turned the rock over in her hands, studying it from every angle. Then she set it down and looked at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Don't get excited, she said, but I think you might have gold on your property. Ethan laughed. Gold? Right. I'm serious. Lydia, people have been searching this territory for 30 years. If there was gold worth finding, someone would have found it. Unless it's not where people usually look. She picked up the rock again. This has traces. Probably not much, but traces mean there's a source upstream, or underground. You can tell that from a rock? I've spent years in mining country. You learn to recognize signs. She met his eyes. I'm not saying we're sitting on a fortune. I'm saying it's worth investigating. Ethan wanted to dismiss it, wanted to write it off as optimism or wishful thinking. But Lydia didn't seem like someone prone to either of those things. Even if you're right, he said carefully, mining takes equipment, money, things we don't have. Mining does. But prospecting doesn't. We can do preliminary work ourselves. If we find something worth pursuing, then we figure out next steps. And if we don't find anything, then we're exactly where we are now, no worse off. Ethan looked at the rock in her hand, then at her face. She was serious, completely serious. All right, he said, we try. They spent the next several days developing a routine that worked around both the ranch's needs and Lydia's prospecting efforts. Mornings were for essential work, feeding animals, maintaining equipment, the tasks that couldn't be postponed. Afternoons, when the heat was worst anyway, Lydia would work the creek beds. Ethan watched her from a distance sometimes. She moved with a purpose he recognized because he'd once moved that way himself, before life ground it out of him. She was methodical, patient, would spend an hour on a single section of creek bed, sifting through sediment, examining rocks, making notes. On the third day, Tom Briggs rode out ostensibly to return another borrowed tool. "Heard your woman's been digging around in the creek," he said. "Word travels fast. Always does. What's she looking for?" "Nothing important. People are talking." "People are always talking." "Fair point." Tom paused. "But seriously, Ethan, some folks are getting curious, asking questions about her, about what she's doing here, about whether she's really who she says she is." "She's who she says she is. But she lied about her name. For good reasons." "I believe you. I'm just saying, not everyone will." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah Hutchins asked me to tell you to be careful. Said people are making up stories to fill in the blanks they don't have." "What kind of stories?" "That she's running from the law, that she's after your land, that she's not right in the head." He held up a hand. "I'm not saying I believe any of it, just passing along that it's out there." After Tom left, Ethan found Lydia at the creek. She was crouched in the water, pants rolled up to her knees, hands working through silt. "Town's talking about you," he said. She didn't look up. "I figured they would." "Bothers you?" "I've survived worse than gossip." "Some of them think you're after my land." Now she did look up, eyebrows raised. "This land? The 60 acres of struggle? That's what they think I'm scheming for?" "Apparently." She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "If I wanted land, I'd go somewhere it actually produces something." "I told Tom you're who you say you are." "But some of them won't believe it." "No." She stood, water dripping from her hands and legs, and looked at him seriously. "Does it bother you, what they think?" "Some." "Enough to want me to leave?" "No." The answer came immediately, without thought. "No." "Good." She turned back to her work. "Because I think I found something." Ethan's heart jumped. "What?" "Come here." He waded into the creek, cold enough to make him suck in a breath, and crouched beside her. She showed him a spot where the water had worn away the bank, exposing a seam of different-colored rock. "See that?" She traced the line with her finger. "That's quartz. And in quartz, especially quartz that's been exposed to certain conditions, you sometimes find—" She broke off a small piece of the rock and held it up to the light. There, barely visible, was a fleck of something that caught the sun and held it. Gold. "That's—" Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. "It's not much, and it doesn't mean there's a lot, but it means I was right. There's gold on this property." They stared at the tiny fleck together, both understanding that this changed everything and also might mean nothing at all. "What do we do?" Ethan asked. "We keep looking, map out where these quartz seams run. Try to figure out if this is just trace amounts or if there's an actual vein worth pursuing." She looked at him. "But we do it quietly. If word gets out, people will come, stake claims, try to take the land." "Exactly. So we tell no one." "No one." They worked together the rest of that afternoon, carefully, systematically exploring the creek bed and the exposed banks. They found 3 more spots with similar quartz formations. 2 had traces of gold. 1 had slightly more. By evening, they were exhausted and covered in mud, but cautiously optimistic. "I need to go deeper," Lydia said as they cleaned up. "The creek bed is showing us what's washed down over years, but the source is somewhere upstream or underground. That's what we need to find." "How do we do that?" "Carefully, and with tools we don't have." "So we need money, or we need to be creative." That night, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, mapping out what they'd found and planning their next steps. It felt almost like a partnership, like they were building something together instead of just surviving parallel to each other. "I never thought I'd care about gold," Ethan admitted. "Always seemed like something for desperate people or dreamers." "Which one are we?" "Both, probably," Lydia smiled. "Then we're in good company. Most of the people who found anything worth finding were both." How many didn't find anything at all? More than did, but they're not the ones people tell stories about. The work continued. Days turned into weeks. They developed a rhythm. Ranch work, prospecting, planning, more ranch work. Sometimes they'd go hours without talking, just working side by side. Other times they'd talk about everything and nothing. Slowly, the strangeness wore off. The awkwardness of being two people who barely knew each other but had a complicated history eased into something more comfortable. But the anger Ethan had mentioned still surfaced sometimes. One evening, about 3 weeks after Lydia's arrival, they were eating dinner when he put down his fork suddenly. "I need to ask you something." Lydia looked up. "All right, that morning, 10 years ago, when you left." His voice was tight. "Did you think about leaving me a note? Some kind of explanation?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, but you didn't." "I was terrified. I saw my husband in town and I panicked. All I could think was that I needed to disappear completely. No trail, no connection, nothing he could use to find me or hurt you. You could have sent something later, after you were safe. I thought about it, every day for months. But by then, so much time had passed, and I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like an excuse or a lie." She met his eyes. "And honestly, part of me thought it would be easier for you if you just forgot me." "Easier?" "Yes. You thought 10 years of not knowing what happened would be easier than a letter." Her face flushed. "When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous." "It was ridiculous. I know that now. Do you?" He pushed away from the table. "Because I spent 10 years thinking you left because of me. Because I wasn't enough. Because something I said or did made you run." "Ethan, no, let me finish." He paced the kitchen. "I replayed that evening 1,000 times. Tried to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. It ate at me, made me doubt everything. I never meant for that, but that's what happened." He stopped, facing her. "Your intention doesn't change the impact." Lydia stood. "You're right. I hurt you. I made selfish choices out of fear and told myself they were for your protection. But really, I was protecting myself." "From what?" "From having to face what I'd done. From having to explain or justify or deal with the consequences of leaving." Her voice cracked. "It was cowardly. I was cowardly. And I'm sorry." They stood there, the table between them, years of hurt and misunderstanding finally out in the open. "I don't know how to forgive you," Ethan said quietly. "I want to, but I don't know how. I don't expect you to. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Then what are we doing here?" "Trying." She wiped at her eyes. "We're trying. That's all we can do." The argument, if it could even be called that, left them both raw. They moved around each other carefully for the next few days, polite but distant. But the work continued. The prospecting, the ranch maintenance, the slow, methodical search for something that might not even exist. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon nearly a month after Lydia's arrival, she called out to him from the eastern section of the property. Her voice carried urgency. Ethan dropped what he was doing and ran. He found her standing in the creek bed, hands shaking, staring at something she'd unearthed. "What is it?" She turned to him, face pale. "Ethan, I found the vein." He looked down. There, exposed by her careful excavation, was a seam of quartz shot through with gold. Not traces, not flecks. Real, visible gold running through the rock like a promise. "How much?" His voice came out hoarse. "I don't know. Could be a small pocket, could be more." She looked at him. "But it's enough to change things. If we work it right." They stood there looking at what they'd found, and Ethan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Real, dangerous, terrifying hope. "We tell no one," Lydia said firmly. "Not yet. We need a plan. Need to figure out how to secure the claim properly, how to extract it without drawing attention, how to—" "Lydia," she stopped. "We found it." "I know. We actually found it." A smile broke across her face, real and bright. "We did." And for the first time since she'd arrived, Ethan pulled her into his arms not out of grief or desperation, but out of joy. They'd gambled on something impossible, and it had paid off. Now came the hard part, figuring out what to do next without losing everything in the process. The euphoria lasted exactly 3 hours. That's how long it took for reality to sink in and replace the initial excitement with cold, practical fear. They sat at the kitchen table that evening, the lamp burning low, both of them staring at the rough sketch Lydia had made of the vein's location and approximate size. "We can't mine it ourselves," Ethan said. "Not properly. We'd need equipment, permits, people who know what they're doing. Which requires money we don't have and draws attention we can't afford. So what do we do?" Lydia tapped her pencil against the paper. "We extract what we can by hand, quietly. Enough to get capital for proper operations. That's still mining, still illegal without the right paperwork. Technically. But if we're careful, if we take only what we can carry out in small amounts, we'd be thieves, stealing from our own land." She looked at him sharply. "Is it stealing if it's yours? It is if the law says we can't touch it without filing claims and paying fees we can't afford." Ethan ran his hands through his hair. "And the moment we file those claims, every prospector and claim jumper within 100 miles will know about it. So we're trapped. We found something valuable and we can't touch it." They sat in frustrated silence, the cruel irony of their situation hanging heavy between them. Finally, Lydia spoke. "There's another option." "I'm listening." "We take out enough to file the proper claims and hire security, just enough to do it right." "That's a lot of gold to move, a lot of risk." "I know, but it's the only way that doesn't leave us vulnerable." She met his eyes. "We take the risk now, or we risk losing everything later." Ethan thought about his ranch, about the 10 years he'd spent barely surviving, about the debts he carried, and the future that had looked increasingly bleak before Lydia arrived. How long would it take to extract enough? Working at night? Carefully? Maybe 2 months? 3 to be safe. That's a long time to keep a secret in Dry Hollow. Then we give them something else to talk about. Like what? A slow smile crossed her face. Like a wedding. Ethan blinked. What? Think about it. Town's already gossiping about me being here, about what we are to each other. They're suspicious because there's no clear definition. She leaned forward. But if we get married, suddenly it all makes sense. Mail order bride arrives, couple gets married, wife helps with ranch work. Simple. Boring. Not worth watching closely. You want to get married as a distraction. I want to get married because it makes practical sense. The distraction is a bonus. That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. Did you want romantic? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I don't know what I want. Be honest. You've thought about it. Maybe. And? Ethan looked at her across the table, at this woman who'd been back in his life for barely a month, but who felt somehow essential now. I thought about it 10 years ago. That night. Imagined asking you to stay. Imagined building something. But you left. And I learned that imagining things and having them are very different. They are. She reached across and took his hand. So I'm not asking you to imagine. I'm asking you to decide. Practical question, practical answer. Does it make sense for us to marry? For the distraction? For everything. The legal protection, the claim rights, the fact that we're already living together and the town's getting restless about it. She paused. And maybe because we both spent 10 years alone and we're tired of it. That's still not romantic. I'm not a romantic person anymore, Ethan. My husband beat that out of me. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. But I am a practical person. And practically speaking, this works. He studied her face, looking for something he couldn't quite name, some hint of feeling beyond pragmatism. What if I wanted it to be more than practical? He asked quietly. Her expression softened slightly. Then we'd have to figure out what more looks like. And that's harder. Yeah, but we could try, while also being practical. Is that possible? I don't know. But we won't find out by sitting here debating it. Ethan withdrew his hand and stood, pacing to the window. Outside, darkness had fully settled over the ranch. His ranch. That might actually be worth something now if they could just figure out how to protect it. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it right. Not some quick ceremony to check a box. Agreed. And we're honest about what it is. A partnership. Maybe more eventually, but we don't pretend it's a fairy tale. I wasn't planning to. He turned back to face her. Then, yes. Let's get married. Lydia nodded, and if she was disappointed by the lack of ceremony in his answer, she didn't show it. I'll talk to the circuit preacher next time he comes through. Should be next week. That fast? You want to wait? No, you're right. The sooner we do this, the sooner people stop watching us like we're their personal entertainment. And the sooner we can focus on the gold. Always back to the gold. The thing that had changed everything and complicated everything in equal measure. The next morning, Ethan rode into town alone. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to gauge the temperature of local gossip, to see what people were saying and how suspicious they were. Mrs. Chen greeted him with her usual brusque efficiency. Your woman settling in? She's got a name, Lydia. Lydia, then. She's settling? Well enough? People are curious about her. People are always curious. More than usual this time. Mrs. Chen rang up his purchases. Some folks think she's after something. She's after a life, same as anyone. And the digging in the creek bed? Ethan kept his face neutral. She's interested in geology, likes rocks. Rocks. Mrs. Chen's tone suggested she didn't believe that for a second, but wasn't going to push it. Well, as long as she's not causing trouble. She's not. Good. Because this town's got enough problems without adding gold fever to the mix. The words hit Ethan like a punch. Gold fever? That's what some are calling it. Figure she's got you convinced there's gold on your property. Mrs. Chen shrugged. I think it's nonsense. If there was gold in this valley, someone would have found it 30 years ago. Exactly what I told her. Smart man. She handed him his purchases. For what it's worth, I like her. Got backbone. But you be careful. Desperate people make desperate choices. After leaving the general store, Ethan found Tom at the saloon. Mid-morning was early for drinking, but Tom had never been one to follow conventional schedules. Ethan? Tom waved him over. Buy you a drink? It's not even noon. So? Rules are for people with better things to do. Ethan sat. What are people saying? About your woman? Lots of things. Most of it speculation and bullshit. Tom took a long drink. But there's talk she's got you believing there's gold out there. I'm not an idiot, Tom. Didn't say you were, just saying people are worried you're being conned. By a woman who showed up with nothing but a trunk and a bag? Love makes people stupid, or so I'm told. Tom grinned. I wouldn't know personally. We're getting married. Tom nearly choked on his drink. What? Next week, probably, when the preacher comes through. Hell, Ethan, you've known her a month. Known her 10 years, actually. Known she existed. That's different than knowing who she is now. Maybe, but it's happening anyway. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, You love her? The question caught Ethan off guard. I don't know. That's honest, at least. I loved who she was. I think I could love who she is. But right now it's more complicated than that. Marriage usually is. Speaking from experience? Hell no. From observation. Tom signaled for another drink. Just be careful, all right? I'd hate to see you get hurt worse than you already have been. The concern in his friend's voice was genuine, and it touched something in Ethan he'd been trying to ignore. The fear that he was making another mistake. That this would end badly. That 10 years from now he'd be right back where he started, alone and broken, with new reasons to regret. But the alternative was to walk away from the only thing that had felt like forward motion in a decade. He couldn't do that. When he returned to the ranch, he found Lydia exactly where he'd expected, down at the creek, working. She'd rigged up a simple sluice box from scrap wood and was running sediment through it, patient and methodical. Town's talking, he announced. She didn't look up. About what specifically? About you being a con artist who's convinced me there's gold on worthless land. Ironic. That's what I thought. He crouched beside her. Mrs. Chen called it gold fever. Said the town's seen it before. Have they? 20 years ago, some prospector came through claiming he'd found a big strike just north of here. Got half the town invested. Turned out to be nothing. A lot of people lost money they couldn't afford to lose. Lydia finally looked at him. So they're primed to disbelieve. Exactly. That works in our favor. As long as they think we're chasing nothing, they won't pay attention to what we're actually doing. She had a point, but it didn't make Ethan feel better. I told Tom we're getting married. How'd he take it? Thought I was being reckless. Are you? Probably. He sat down properly, boots in the cold water. But I've been careful for 10 years and it got me nowhere. Maybe reckless is what I need. That's either wisdom or rationalization. Could be both. They worked together for a while, not talking, just moving through the repetitive motions of sifting and sorting. It was peaceful in a way that surprised Ethan. He'd expected working with another person to feel intrusive, but it didn't. It felt like what he'd been missing. Can I ask you something? Lydia said eventually. Yeah. Do you regret it? Writing to that marriage service? Ethan considered the question. I regretted it before you showed up. Felt like admitting defeat. And now? Now I think it was the smartest thing I've done in 10 years. She smiled, and it was real and unguarded in a way he didn't see often from her. Even though I lied about who I was? You didn't lie. You just didn't tell me everything. That's a generous interpretation. I'm feeling generous today. The wedding happened on a Tuesday. The circuit preacher, a tired-looking man named Reverend Walsh, had agreed to perform the ceremony for a modest fee Ethan barely had. They held it at the ranch rather than in town, with only Sarah Hutchins, Tom Briggs, and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Lydia wore the same gray dress she'd arrived in, cleaned and pressed. Ethan wore his Sunday shirt with the vest that didn't quite fit right anymore. There were no flowers, no decorations, no music. It was practical and simple, and over in less than 10 minutes. Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Lydia Vance, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband? A brief hesitation, so brief Ethan almost missed it. Then, I do. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss. Reverend Walsh didn't even suggest it. Just shook both their hands, accepted his payment, and left. Mrs. Chen had brought bread and preserves. Sarah had made a small cake. Tom contributed whiskey. They sat on Ethan's porch eating and drinking while the sun set, and it felt less like a celebration and more like a wake for their individual lives. Well, Tom said after his third drink, you're officially crazy now. It's legal. Thanks for the support. I'm here for you. Tom raised his glass. To Ethan and Lydia. May they figure out what the hell they're doing before it kills them. Tom, Sarah chided. What? I'm being honest. Isn't that what everyone wants? Mrs. Chen ignored him and addressed Lydia directly. You need anything for the house, you come see me. I'll extend your husband's credit. Thank you. And if he gives you trouble, you also come see me. I'll set him straight. Ethan almost smiled. Glad to know whose side you're on. I'm on the side of functional marriages. Those are good for business. After the guests left, Ethan and Lydia stood together in the growing darkness, neither quite sure what to do next. So, Lydia said. So, we're married. Legally binding and everything. Should feel different. Does it? She considered. Not really. We were already living together, already working together. This just makes it official. Romantic as ever. You knew what you were getting. He had. But some small part of him had hoped that saying vows, even practical ones, might shift something. Might make this feel less like a business arrangement and more like what he dreamed about 10 years ago. It didn't. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the dream version had been unrealistic anyway. They went inside and fell into their respective routines. Lydia went upstairs to the guest room that was still her room. Ethan stayed downstairs, cleaning up from the small gathering. Married. The word felt strange in his mind. He'd never imagined marrying anyone after Lydia disappeared, had assumed that part of life was over for him, and now here he was, married to the very person he'd mourned. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something he didn't fully understand. The work intensified after the wedding. During the day, they maintained the appearance of normal ranch life. Ethan handled the visible work, fences, crops, animals. Lydia helped, but also spent time collecting rocks near the creek, which the town had accepted as her odd hobby. At night, after dark, they worked the vein. It was slow, exhausting, dangerous work. They couldn't use proper mining techniques without making noise and drawing attention. Instead, they carefully extracted loose pieces of quartz, using hand tools to chip away at the exposed seam. Some nights they worked for hours and got nothing. Other nights they'd pull out pieces shot through with visible gold. Lydia kept meticulous records: locations, amounts, quality. She estimated they'd need at least $3,000 worth to properly file claims and secure their position. At current rates and their current pace, that meant 2 more months of night work, 2 months of secrecy, 2 months of hoping no one noticed. It almost worked. They were 6 weeks into their night operations when Tom showed up unexpectedly on a Thursday evening. Ethan and Lydia were sitting on the porch, exhausted from the previous night's work, when Tom rode up looking troubled. "We need to talk," he said. "All right." Tom glanced at Lydia, then back to Ethan. "Alone. Anything you say to me, you can say in front of my wife." "You sure about that?" "Tom, what's going on?" Tom dismounted and climbed the porch steps. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "There's talk in town. More than usual." "There's always talk. Not like this. Someone saw lights on your eastern property at night. Multiple nights. And they're asking questions." Ethan's blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that start with curiosity and end with people showing up uninvited to see what you're doing." "Who saw the lights?" "Davis, the sheriff. He was out chasing a rustling report, saw your lanterns." "Did he investigate?" "Not yet, but he mentioned it at the saloon, and now people are putting things together. Your wife's rock collecting, the lights, the way you've been to town less and less." Tom looked between them. "Whatever you're doing out there, people are starting to figure it out." Lydia spoke for the first time. "How long do we have?" "Before someone comes looking? Days. Maybe a week if you're lucky." After Tom left, Ethan and Lydia sat in the gathering darkness, both understanding that their timeline had just collapsed. "We can't stop now," Lydia said. "We're close. Another 3 weeks and we'd have enough." 3 weeks is too long if people start showing up in 3 days. So we speed up, take more risks. Or we stop, hide what we've found and wait. Wait for what? For someone else to stumble onto it? For word to spread and claim jumpers to arrive? She shook her head. We wait, we lose it all. We push forward recklessly, we might lose it faster. They were at an impasse and both knew it. Finally, Ethan said, "We have one option we haven't considered." "What?" "We tell Davis the truth, show him what we found, get official protection, and trust that a part-time sheriff in a frontier town won't tell anyone, won't take a cut, won't suddenly decide the claim should be his? Davis is honest. Most people are honest until there's enough gold involved." Lydia's voice was hard. "I've seen it happen. Good people turn bad when they smell money. So we trust no one. We trust each other, that's it." Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because she was right. In a town this small, this desperate, news of a real gold strike would spread like wildfire. And once it did, they'd be fighting off claim jumpers, opportunists, and worse. "Then we work faster," he said finally. "Double our efforts. Take what we can get in the next week and hope it's enough. It won't be enough for proper operations, but it might be enough to secure the claim and hire a few men to guard it while we figure out next steps." "That's a big might. You got a better option?" She didn't, so they pushed forward. The next 7 days were brutal. They worked through the nights with an urgency that bordered on desperate, extracting as much as they dared without causing a collapse or making too much noise. During the days, Ethan made a point of being visible in town, acting normal, deflecting questions about the lights, with vague explanations about checking on sick livestock. People didn't quite believe him, but they didn't quite disbelieve him either. It was enough. On the 6th night, they had their closest call. They were working the vein around 2 in the morning when Rust suddenly whinnied from where she was tied nearby. Ethan froze, hand on his pickaxe, listening. Hoofbeats. Someone was coming. "Lights out," he hissed. Lydia immediately doused their lanterns, plunging them into darkness. They waited, hearts pounding, as the hoofbeats grew closer. A single rider appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the moonlight. He sat there for a long moment, obviously looking down at their position. Then, without a word, he turned and rode away. "Who was that?" Lydia whispered. "Couldn't tell. But whoever it was knows we're out here." "Do we stop?" Every instinct screamed at Ethan to quit, to pack up and hide what they'd found and wait for things to calm down. But he looked at the vein they'd been working, at the gold they'd carefully extracted and hidden, and he knew stopping now meant losing everything they'd worked for. "No," he said. "We finish tonight. Whatever we can get. Then we're done." They worked until dawn, extracting every piece they could safely reach. When the sun started to lighten the sky, they covered their work site, gathered their tools and their findings, and headed back to the house. In the barn, by lamplight, they spread out everything they'd collected. It wasn't as much as they'd hoped for, but it was something. "How much do you think?" Ethan asked. Lydia sorted through the pieces, weighing them mentally, calculating. "Maybe 2,000, possibly 2,500 if we're lucky." "That's not enough for full operations." "No, but it might be enough to file the claim and hire basic security while we figure out proper extraction." "Might. It's what we have." Ethan looked at the gold, their future, hopefully, and made a decision. "Tomorrow, I ride to the county seat, file the proper paperwork, make this official before anyone else can. That's 2 days' ride, each way." "I know. What about here? What about protecting the site while you're gone? You stay. If anyone comes asking, you tell them I'm away on business. You don't know what kind." "Ethan, I trust you to handle it. You've survived worse than nosy neighbors." She looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find grounds to. "When do you leave?" "First light?" "Then we should rest." But neither of them rested. They spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing, organizing the gold for transport, getting Ethan's travel supplies ready, going over the story Lydia would tell if anyone asked questions. As dawn broke properly, Ethan loaded Rust with carefully concealed saddlebags and checked his revolver. Lydia walked him out to where he was mounting up. "Be careful," she said. "Always am." "I mean it, that much gold on the road alone. I know the risks." She grabbed his stirrup, stopping him from leaving. "Ethan, come back." The raw vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. "I will." "Promise me." "I promise." She released his stirrup and stepped back, arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill. Ethan looked down at her, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd changed everything, and felt the full weight of what they were risking settle on his shoulders. Then he turned Rust toward the road and rode toward whatever came next. The ride to the county seat took Ethan through to territory he hadn't traveled in years. The landscape shifted from the familiar scrubland around Dry Hollow to rockier terrain, then into foothills that promised mountains beyond. Each mile felt longer than the last, weighted by what he carried and what he'd left behind. He made camp the first night in a shallow canyon, building a small fire and keeping Rust close. The saddlebags never left his sight. He'd sewn the gold into canvas pouches and distributed them carefully to avoid obvious weight on one side. But he was acutely aware that anyone with experience would recognize a man traveling with something valuable. Sleep came in fits. Every sound, wind through rocks, a distant coyote, Rust shifting her weight, pulled him back to alertness with his hand on his revolver. By the time dawn broke, he was exhausted and on edge. The second day was worse. The road became more traveled as he approached the county seat, which meant more people to notice him, more chances for word to spread about a lone rider from Dry Hollow carrying heavy saddlebags. He passed a freight wagon around noon. The driver nodded, but his eyes lingered on Rust's gait, calculating the weight she carried. Ethan nodded back and kept moving, faster than was probably wise. He reached the county seat, a town called Silver Ridge, just before dark on the second day. It was bigger than Dry Hollow by a factor of 10, with actual streets, multiple saloons, a proper courthouse, and the kind of commerce that came with being a regional center. Ethan found a boarding house, paid for a room, and hauled his saddlebags upstairs himself, despite the proprietor's offer to help. He wedged a chair under the door handle and barely slept again, listening to footsteps in the hallway and voices through thin walls. At first light, he was at the land office before it opened. The clerk, a meticulous man named Henderson, looked at Ethan over his spectacles with the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of desperate prospector and wasn't impressed by any of them. "I need to file a mining claim," Ethan said. "You and half the territory." Henderson pulled out a form. "Location?" "Dry Hollow area, Eastern Valley section." Any existing claims on the property? It's my ranch. I own the land. That doesn't automatically grant mineral rights. When did you acquire the property? Ethan provided the details, dates, previous owner information. Henderson checked records with agonizing slowness. You're in luck, he said finally. Mineral rights weren't separated in the original sale. They're yours to claim. So I can file? You can file. Doesn't mean you have anything worth filing for. Henderson's tone suggested he'd heard 1,000 claims of gold strikes that amounted to nothing. Filing fee is $50. Ethan paid it from money he could barely spare. You'll need to prove the claim within 6 months, Henderson continued. Show evidence of minerals present and intent to extract. Otherwise, claim reverts to public domain. I have evidence. You personally have evidence? Or someone told you they saw something? I have evidence. Henderson's eyes sharpened slightly. Show me. Ethan had anticipated this. He'd brought one of the smaller pieces, nothing so impressive it would draw immediate trouble, but enough to prove he wasn't wasting everyone's time. He unwrapped it and set it on the desk. Henderson picked it up, turned it in the light, and his expression shifted from bored skepticism to careful neutrality. Where did you find this? On my property, like I said. Recently? Within the last 2 months. Henderson set down the rock with deliberate care. Mr. Cole, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. How many people know about this? Why? Because if word gets out, you'll have half the territory descending on your property with dubious legal arguments and guns to back them up. Filing this claim puts it in public record. Anyone can see it. Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd known filing would create a record, but somehow he'd convinced himself it would take time for people to notice. Henderson was making it clear that wasn't how it worked. How long before people know? Ethan asked. Officially? The record posts at end of business today. Practically? Someone will notice by tomorrow morning. By tomorrow night, word will spread. Henderson leaned forward. You need security, Mr. Cole. Real security. Not optimism and a revolver. I can't afford security. Then you need to get creative or get lucky, because men have killed for less than what you're showing me here. Ethan left the land office with his claim filed and a sick feeling in his gut. He had what he came for, legal right to the gold on his property, but he'd also just painted a target on his back. He spent the rest of the day trying to find security he could afford. The first 3 outfits he approached laughed at what he could pay. The fourth was willing to negotiate but wanted a percentage of any findings. 10% of what we pull out, the man said. He was a former Army scout named Garrett with scars that suggested he'd earned his experience the hard way. That's steep. That's fair. You want men willing to kill to protect your claim. You pay what that costs. 5%. 8% and we provide our own equipment. Ethan calculated rapidly. 8% of what they might pull from that vein could be considerable. But 8% of something was better than 100% of nothing if claim jumpers took it all. Deal. But I need 3 men minimum, and I need them now. Now as in? I rode 2 days to get here. By the time I ride back, word will be spreading. I need your men on my property before trouble arrives. Garrett studied him. You're that certain trouble's coming? You saw my filing. You know what that means. I do. Garrett stood. I can have 2 men ready to ride within the hour. 3rd will follow tomorrow. That work? It'll have to. By midday, Ethan was back on the road with 2 armed men, Garrett himself and a younger man named Morrison, who looked like he'd been in more fights than conversations. They rode hard, pushing to cover in 1.5 days what had taken Ethan 2 on the way out. They reached the ranch late on the 2nd night, arriving to find every lamp in the house lit and Lydia standing on the porch with a rifle. She lowered it when she recognized Ethan, relief flooding her face. You're back. Told you I would be. He dismounted, introduced Garrett and Morrison. They're here to help secure the property. We've had visitors, Lydia said. 3 different groups in the 2 days you were gone. What kind of visitors? Curious ones, asking questions, wanting to see the property. I told them all my husband was away on business and they'd need to come back. Did they? One group, yesterday afternoon, 5 men. They rode the property line like they were surveying it. Garrett spoke up. They stake anything? No, but they were taking notes. Prospectors, Garrett said to Ethan. Testing to see if your claim is legitimate and how well defended it is. They'll be back with more men once word officially spreads. How long do we have? Day, maybe 2. Garrett looked around the property, assessing it with professional eyes. We need to establish a perimeter, set up camp near the claim site, make it clear this property is occupied and defended. Do it, Ethan said. After Garrett and Morrison rode off to scout the eastern section, Ethan and Lydia went inside. She moved immediately to make coffee, her hands steady despite obvious exhaustion. You didn't sleep, Ethan observed. Couldn't. Every sound made me think someone was coming. She poured coffee with mechanical precision. Did you get it filed? Yes. And the clerk said we're about to have company, dangerous company. I figured. She handed him a cup. There's more you should know. Davis came by yesterday. The sheriff. He was asking specific questions about what we're doing out by the creek. What did you tell him? That you're my husband and I don't question your business. He didn't like that answer. He suspect anything? I think he knows something's happening, but he doesn't know what exactly, yet. They sat in tired silence, both understanding they'd crossed a line. The moment Ethan filed that claim, their quiet prospecting had become public knowledge. Now they had to defend what they'd found or lose it to whoever was willing to fight harder. Was it worth it? Lydia asked quietly. Filing the claim. Bringing in hired guns. All of it. Ask me in a week. I'm asking now. Ethan set down his coffee and looked at her directly. You asked me once what I wanted. I said I wanted to stop waiting, to move forward instead of standing still. He paused. This is moving forward. It's messy and scary and might not work, but it's not standing still. Even if we lose everything? We were already losing everything, slowly. This way at least we're fighting. A small smile crossed her face. I can work with fighting. The next 3 days proved just how much fight they'd need. The first group arrived on day 2. 6 men who claimed to be surveying public land and seemed surprised to find the property occupied and defended. Garrett sent them off with a firm message that the land was private and the claim was filed. They left, but Ethan knew they'd be back. The second group was more aggressive. 8 men who arrived at dawn on day 3 demanding to see proof of the claim. Morrison showed them the paperwork while Garrett made it clear with his positioning and his rifle that the conversation was over. That group left too, but not before their leader, a hard-faced man named Pritchard, made it clear this wasn't finished. You can't guard that whole property forever, Pritchard said. Sooner or later you'll slip up. Sooner or later you'll try something stupid, Garrett replied. I'll be waiting when you do. After they left, Garrett turned to Ethan. We need more men. 3 isn't enough to hold this if they come in force. I can't afford more men. Then you better hope they don't realize that. On day 4, Davis the sheriff finally showed up. He rode in alone, hands visible, no obvious weapons drawn. But Ethan noticed he'd positioned himself where he could reach his revolver quickly if needed. Ethan, Davis said, we need to talk. About what? About whatever's going on out here that's got half the territory interested in your property. I filed a mining claim. It's legal. I know about the claim. Saw the posting yesterday. Davis dismounted. What I want to know is if there's actually gold here or if you're being conned. There's gold. You've seen it yourself. Found it myself. Davis absorbed that, his expression unreadable. How much? Enough to matter. Enough to kill over? Apparently. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm going to be straight with you. I can't protect this property. I've got jurisdiction over Dry Hollow proper, but out here, this is too far out, too isolated. If someone decides to take what you've found by force, I can't stop them. I'm not asking you to, but I'm asking you to be smart. Whatever you've got here, it's not worth dying over. That's easy to say when it's not your future on the line. Your future won't matter if you're dead, Ethan. They stood in tense silence until Davis sighed and remounted his horse. I like you, he said. You've been a good neighbor, a decent man. I'd hate to see you get killed over this. He turned his horse. But I'm also not going to shed tears for prospectors stupid enough to attack defended property. You want my advice? Make an example of the first group that tries something. Word will spread. After Davis left, Lydia came out from where she'd been listening inside. He's right, you know. This could get us killed. I know. So why aren't we running? Because I spent 10 years running from everything that mattered. I'm done. Even if it means fighting? Especially if it means fighting. She studied his face, then nodded. All right then. We fight. The attack came that night. Ethan was checking the livestock when he heard Morrison's whistle, the signal they'd agreed on. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the eastern section where Garrett had established their defensive position. He found Garrett and Morrison crouched behind makeshift cover, watching a group of men approaching through the darkness. How many? Ethan whispered. I count 9. Probably more hanging back. Garrett checked his rifle. They're trying to look casual, taking a late-night walk, but they're armed and moving with purpose. Pritchard's group? Can't tell yet, but I'd bet on it. The men got closer, close enough that Ethan could see they were indeed armed, close enough that their intention was clear. Garrett stood up, rifle ready, but not aimed. That's far enough, gentlemen. The men stopped. Their leader, not Pritchard, but someone equally hard-looking, called out, "This is public land. It's private property with a filed claim. You're trespassing. We have a right to verify claims. Not at night, you don't. Come back during daylight hours with proper authorization, or don't come back at all. And if we decide to verify it now?" Garrett's response was calm and absolute. "Then we'll have a problem, and problems at night tend to get people killed." For a long moment, nobody moved. Ethan's heart hammered. His finger rested near the trigger. He'd never shot anyone, never even come close. But he would, if they pushed this. The men seemed to sense it. Something in Garrett's stance, or Morrison's readiness, or maybe just the darkness and uncertainty made them reconsider. "We'll be back," the leader said. "I'm sure you will. During proper hours. With proper authority." The men retreated, but Ethan knew it was temporary. "They're testing us," Garrett said after they'd gone. "Seeing how we react, what our defenses are. Next time they'll come prepared." "How long until next time?" "Day or 2. They'll want to organize, maybe get more men. So what do? We prepare. And we make sure that when they do come back, we're ready to make it hurt." The next day they worked feverishly to improve their defenses. Garrett had them dig trenches, establish clear lines of sight, create fallback positions. Morrison rode back to Silver Ridge to recruit 2 more men, promising them pay from future gold extraction. Lydia worked alongside them, handling a shovel as competently as any man. She didn't complain about the heat or the exhaustion, just worked with the same grim determination Ethan had come to associate with her. By evening, they'd created something that resembled a defensible position. "It's not perfect," Garrett admitted, "but it'll make them think twice." That night, Ethan and Lydia sat on their porch while the hired men kept watch on the eastern section. "I keep thinking about that first night," Lydia said, "when we met 10 years ago. How simple everything seemed." "It probably wasn't simple then either. We just didn't know better." "Maybe." She leaned back in her chair. "You ever regret any of this? Writing that letter, me showing up, all of it?" Ethan considered the question honestly. "I regret the pain. I regret the 10 years lost. I regret that we're sitting here preparing for a fight instead of just living. But I don't regret you. Even with everything that came with you, the complications, the fear, the gold that's causing all this trouble, I don't regret you being here." "That's probably the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it. I'm not good at nice things." She laughed, and the sound cut through the tension like light through darkness. "We're going to make it through this," she said. "I don't know how, but we will." That's optimism talking. "No, that's stubbornness. There's a difference." The second attack came 2 nights later, and this time they came in force. Ethan woke to gunfire and Morrison shouting warnings. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside in his long underwear, barely conscious but running on pure adrenaline. At least 15 men were approaching from multiple directions, using the darkness for cover. They weren't trying to talk this time. They were trying to overwhelm through numbers. Garrett's training saved them. The defensive positions they'd established gave them angles the attackers hadn't expected. The trenches provided cover. The clear sight lines meant every shot had a chance to count. Ethan fired at muzzle flashes, not sure if he hit anything, but knowing he had to keep shooting. The noise was deafening. The smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Someone screamed, hit, but Ethan couldn't tell which side. Morrison went down with a wound to his shoulder but kept firing with his other hand. Lydia appeared beside Ethan, her own rifle steady, and he realized she'd been shooting too. Where she'd learned, he didn't know and didn't have time to ask. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. Finally, the attackers retreated, dragging their wounded with them. 2 bodies lay in the field between the defensive position and where they'd approached from. In the sudden silence, Ethan's ears rang. Garrett appeared, checking their casualties. Morrison needs attention. Nothing life-threatening, but he's out of the fight. Everyone else? I'm good, Ethan managed. Cut on my arm, Lydia said. Nothing serious. Garrett looked at the bodies in the field. They'll come back for those. And when they do, we send a message. What message? That this property is defended. That there's a cost to trying to take it. That we're not going anywhere. By dawn, the attackers had retrieved their dead. They also left something behind. A crudely written note weighted down with a rock. It said simply, "We can keep coming. Can you keep standing?" Ethan showed it to Garrett, who read it and nodded grimly. They're not wrong. We held them off once. But if they keep coming, eventually they'll break through or we'll run out of bullets. So what do? We change the game, stop defending, and start negotiating. Negotiate what? Access. Controlled access. They want a prospect? Fine. But they do it on our terms, paying for the privilege with clear boundaries. Ethan wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Garrett that this was his land and he'd defend it without compromise. But he wasn't stupid. They'd barely survived one coordinated attack. They couldn't hold off a siege. How would that work? You lease sections of the property for prospecting. Fixed term, fixed percentage of any finds. They get a legitimate shot at finding something. You get money up front and a cut of anything they pull out. And most importantly, they become invested in protecting the area from other prospectors. That's a lot of trust to put in people who just attacked us. It is, but it's also survival. The alternative is we keep fighting until someone gets killed, and even if we win, we lose everything in the process. Lydia had been listening quietly. Now she spoke up. There's another option. Both men looked at her. We sell. What? Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. We sell the claim, take what we've already extracted, add it to whatever a mining company would pay for proven gold property, and we walk away. After everything we've been through, we'd be alive and solvent. Isn't that worth something? We could be rich, Lydia. Actually rich, if we develop this properly. Or we could be dead, if someone gets lucky. She looked at him steadily. I didn't survive my husband, didn't survive 10 years running, didn't find you again just to watch you die over gold in the ground. The words hit Ethan hard, because she was right. Somewhere in the last few weeks, he'd stopped thinking about the gold as means to an end, and started thinking about it as the end itself, the thing worth fighting for, worth dying for. But it wasn't. The thing worth fighting for was sitting across from him, bandaged and exhausted, offering to walk away from a fortune to keep him alive. If we sell, he said slowly, we need to do it right, get proper value, not let ourselves be cheated out of desperation. Agreed. Garrett looked between them. I know a company, reputable. They'll pay fair value for proven claims. Want me to send word? Do it. The negotiations took 2 weeks. During that time, Ethan and Lydia maintained their defensive position with Garrett's help. Word had spread about the failed attack, and that bought them some breathing room. People were watching to see what happened next. The mining company sent representatives, serious men with contracts and surveyors, and an air of professional competence that made Ethan feel simultaneously relieved and out of his depth. They studied the vein, took samples, asked questions. Finally, they made an offer. $7,000 for the claim, plus 15% of any gold extracted in the first 2 years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than Ethan had seen in his entire life. What do you think? He asked Lydia. I think it's fair. More than fair, actually. It's less than we could make if we developed it ourselves. It's also guaranteed, and it lets us keep living. Ethan signed the papers. Just like that, the fight was over. The mining company took possession of the claim the following week. They brought in proper equipment, established a permanent camp, hired security that made Garrett's operation look modest. Ethan and Lydia stood watching from their porch as the operation took shape. You regret it? Lydia asked. Signing away a potential fortune? Yeah, sometimes. But But I still have you. I still have this ranch. And now I have enough money to actually fix it instead of just surviving. He looked at her. That's worth more than gold I'd have to kill someone to keep. That's unusually wise for you. Don't get used to it. With money from the sale, everything changed. Ethan paid off his debts. All of them. The feeling of writing those final payments was almost as satisfying as finding the gold had been. He repaired the ranch properly. New fences, new roof, equipment that actually worked. Hired help for the heavy work so he wasn't constantly exhausted. Lydia used part of the money to establish a small business in town, assaying services for prospectors. Her years of experience and her eye for quality ore made her valuable to people who needed honest assessments. The town's opinion of her shifted gradually. She was no longer the suspicious outsider, but the woman who'd found gold on coal property and hadn't tried to steal it all for herself. That earned respect. 6 months after selling the claim, Ethan and Lydia sat on their porch watching sunset paint the sky. "You know what's strange?" Lydia said. "What?" "I spent 10 years running, and now that I've stopped, I don't want to start again. That's called home." "Is it?" "That's what people tell me." She smiled. "I like it here. I like this life. I like you." "That's 3 likes. You're getting sentimental." "Shut up and take the compliment." Ethan took her hand and they sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't the fairy tale he'd imagined 10 years ago. It was better. Because it was real. They'd survived loss and separation, survived fear and violence, survived the temptation of easy fortune in favor of harder-won stability, and they'd done it together. 1 year after Lydia's arrival, Sarah Hutchins came by with news. "The preacher's coming through next month," she said. "Thought you might like to know." "We're already married," Ethan pointed out. "I know, but Emma was asking if you two were going to have a real wedding. The kind with cake and guests and celebration." Ethan looked at Lydia. "We did have a wedding." "We had a legal transaction witnessed by 3 people," Lydia corrected. "Emma's not wrong to wonder." "You want a real wedding?" "Do you?" They'd gotten good at this, the careful negotiation of what they both wanted without presuming to know what the other needed. "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "I think I do." "Then let's do it, properly this time." The second wedding, the real one, as Emma insisted on calling it, happened on a Saturday afternoon with what felt like half of Dry Hollow in attendance. This time there were flowers, courtesy of Sarah's garden. This time there was music, courtesy of a traveling musician who'd heard about the ceremony. This time there was a cake that Emma and Mrs. Chen had spent 2 days making. And this time when Reverend Walsh asked if they took each other as husband and wife, the answers came without hesitation. "I do," Ethan said, looking at Lydia in a dress borrowed from Sarah, her hair fixed properly for the first time since she'd arrived. "I do," Lydia said, looking at him in a suit that actually fit, his face clean-shaven and less careworn than it had been in years. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Walsh smiled. "You may kiss your bride." And this time, Ethan did. The celebration lasted well into the evening. People danced, ate, drank, and told stories that got more exaggerated with each retelling. Tom Briggs gave a speech that was mostly inappropriate but made everyone laugh. Mrs. Chen gave Lydia a set of dishes and told her not to break them. Emma gave them a drawing she'd made of their ranch, with the 2 of them standing in front of it. As the sun set and the party continued, Ethan and Lydia slipped away to their porch. "That was nice," Lydia said. "Better than the first one?" "Different than the first one. First one was necessary. This one was chosen." "Which matters more?" "Both, in different ways." They stood together watching their neighbors celebrate, and Ethan realized something that felt important enough to say out loud. "I don't believe in miracles," he said. Lydia turned to look at him. "No?" "No, I believe in people who show up, who keep showing up even when it's hard, who refuse to disappear when disappearing would be easier." "Is that what I did?" "That's what we both did. We kept showing up. To that platform, to these letters, to this fight. We showed up scared and broken and not sure if it would work." He took her hand. "But we showed up." Lydia leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "You know what I believe in?" she asked. "What?" "Second chances. Real ones. The kind that don't erase what came before, but build something new on top of it. That's more optimistic than I expected from you. I'm full of surprises. They stayed on the porch long after the party wound down, long after the last guest had left, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Behind them, the house was full of light and warmth. In front of them, the ranch stretched out, no longer struggling but thriving, and between them was something that had taken 10 years and countless setbacks to build. Not perfect love, not fairy tale romance, but partnership, trust, the kind of bond that survives because both people choose it every day instead of once. Years later, people in Dry Hollow still told the story of Ethan Cole and the woman who arrived on a Thursday train. They got details wrong, the way stories always do. Some said she'd been an outlaw running from the law. Some said she'd been a wealthy heiress traveling in disguise. Some said the gold they'd found was worth millions. The truth was simpler and more complicated. Two broken people had found each other twice, had fought to keep what they'd built, had chosen partnership over fortune and presence over perfection. That was the story. And if anyone asked Ethan Cole what he'd learned from it all, he'd pour them coffee, sit them down, and tell them something that sounded simple but wasn't. You can't wait for life to come find you. You have to show up for it. Even when showing up is hard, even when you don't know if it'll work out. You show up anyway. Then he'd glance toward wherever Lydia was, probably working in her assay office or managing some new venture or arguing with someone about proper mining techniques, and add, and if you're lucky enough to find someone worth showing up for, you keep showing up every day, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. That was the lesson Dry Hollow learned from Ethan and Lydia Cole. Not that love conquers all, or that patience brings reward, or any of the other tidy lessons people like to attach to stories. Just that showing up matters. That presence, sustained over time, builds something stronger than any single moment of perfection. That broken people can build unbroken futures if they're willing to do the work. And that sometimes the person you've been waiting for was waiting for you too. They just needed time and courage and a little bit of luck to find their way back to each other.